I think there was, you asked about polls, and as we barreled into late 2005 and began doing benchmark surveys for our clients around the country and clients at various electoral levels, I certainly agree. The issue of competence was a very significant issue. We were telling our clients as early as October and November 2005 that the twin towers of public opinion this year, or the thematic drivers this year, were perceptions not just of incompetence, but of indifference. And those two go hand in hand. And they went hand in hand through the Social Security debate and the tenure that accompanied that, Iraq, Katrina, gas prices, and all of the elements of corruption that emerged along the way. There was a perception not only of the incompetence up and down the line, but also of indifference. And ultimately, that's what made it so very difficult for Republicans to recover this time.
Bill, I would go back to a point that Dan started with. We also did an interview with the President January 10th of 2005, 2 weeks essentially before the second inaugural. And I went back and reread it not long ago. And it's remarkable how little discussion of Iraq there was in that. And maybe that was our mistake, but clearly the President was moving on. He spent a lot of time in that interview talking about democracy in the Middle East. He went from that interview to call Mahmoud Abbas the new elected Palestinian leader, and that's where this debate was going. And I think they had moved beyond Iraq and on to the vision for remaking the world. And I don't criticize them for this. We all thought Iraq was going to be better. I think that's the elephant in this room. You can't escape the fact that they set up a second term that was going to be about a big idea domestically, which was Social Security reform, which I don't think they believed they were going to win, but I thought they thought they would get credit for having tried, and going beyond Iraq to remake the world, to make it a safer place. Well, that didn't happen, but I think it didn't happen in large part because Iraq really wasn't, in retrospect, what they thought it was in January of 2005.
And if I can just jump ahead from the pre-election polls to the exit poll, the Iraq approval and the Bush job approval were tied together almost to the point. In the national exit poll, Bush job approval was 43%, and the approval of the war in Iraq was 42%. And that explained about 80 to 85% of people's vote in the House races, just how they stood on those two issues. They were tied hand in hand.
I would kind of agree with what Dan said, but I think there was something else other than just what the President was saying. I think it was also a matter of positioning. The country had been through a campaign, and frankly, they were tired of politics and campaigning. And we're now in this state of perpetual campaign. And what you had after the State of the Union was this, whoever came up with this great idea of 65 cities in 85 days or whatever it was for campaign rallies for Social Security. I mean, what people really expected was a commander-in-chief, not a campaigner-in-chief. And it was a mispositioning, I believe, on the part of the staff in the White House for the Social Security question, and doing it in the wrong way. And what that did was to perpetuate a campaign that people were frankly tired of. And there was really, and while they may never have gotten Social Security reform passed, but at least the discussion about it could have been, I think, done in a way that would raise the awareness level of at least agreement on the set of facts that surround the issue, so you could then move towards solution. What happened with their Social Security was that they didn't have a plan, and they didn't have a solution that they were going to offer, so you ended up with all of the negatives that were associated with it and none of the positives, and I don't think that they've recovered from that. But I think it was a mispositioning of the President right after the election for not being president but still being campaigner.
Just to follow on Joe's point, Bill, I think the troubles began when they discovered that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. And that was when I think polling showed the numbers crossed for the first time on Bush's approval and his job. Couple that with, look, Republicans were excited after the election that he was going to go out and try to do something, but they went out and did Social Security a little backwards, and instead of just talking about a problem that needed to be addressed and doing these 60 city stops, which were over-the-top campaigning, he put a solution forward before I think people really thought there was a serious problem outside of Washington. And so by doing that, that was the beginning of this disconnect with this president, with the American people. Katrina was obviously a huge disconnect. But it's almost like they were going out talking about something, and then everybody else that had real issues at home, economic, health care, other things that were hitting their pocketbook, there was a total disconnect. And that's what culminated in 2006.
I'd like to make it more basic than that. I've always thought I'd love to have a candidate when he was 10 years old and bring him up to run for X. To avoid the minor problems that end up being major problems. For example, when Bush was campaigning, he was asked about world leaders, and he miserably failed a test. Well, that wasn't a big thing in itself, except that if you thought about it, maybe he isn't terribly smart, but you put that behind you. Then you later listen to him destroy the English language, mispronounce words, use improper syntax, and you say, maybe he's not real smart, but he's a good leader. Or he's honest, or he has great integrity. But what happens, a stone at the time, these things are being chipped away. And so when Katrina happens, they say, yeah, he's dumb. They have all the foundation laid for that. And so he spent a long time convincing us that he wasn't as honest as he said he was. He wasn't smart at all. In fact, at one time, the big rumor around Washington was they had him carrying a book in his hand so that he would appear to be literary, because somebody in his staff had said too publicly that he had never read a book in his life. So they had him carrying a book around. It was sort of laughable. But what he did was he destroyed his underpinnings one at a time. And because we are great disciples of journalism, and I am, having been one, all of that, we tend to look for the big events, the catalytic events that signal, his decline started here. I think the decline started when they slapped him on the ass when he was born.
One of the things, Ray, we want to encourage all the panelists to do is to be blunt and be outspoken. Don't hold anything back.
Well, I'm trying very hard to be nonpartisan.
Well, if I could go back to the Social Security point, one of the reasons, my understanding, that President Bush went all over the country campaigning for the need to change Social Security is because Dennis Hastert felt that he had put House Republicans out on a limb when he proposed the prescription drug program through Medicare and wanting to put senior citizens in HMOs and managed care if they were going to get these benefits. And the Speaker basically, they didn't end up doing it because House Republicans said, and we are not doing that. And so the Speaker said to him, look, if you want to go down this Social Security path, you need to lead the charge this time, because they felt like he just sort of dumped it on them. They got stuck with it. It caused them a lot of problems. It was extremely difficult, and that he wasn't taking the lead. And they wanted him to take the lead on this thing. Well, what happened was Bush ended up being the one who went out on the limb because House Republicans were so worried that taking on this issue was going to cost them all their jobs. And, it may have, I think it did contribute in a lot of ways to that, because he never really convinced Americans that it was in such a crisis or it should be so radically changed.
Let me ask you guys this. I'm sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Bill, that I think another dynamic that was in play with everything that everyone has said so far is that as the cycle went on, you had the campaign warfare start. And surprisingly, the Democratic candidates and the Democratic Party were more coherent in messaging than they had been in the past. And you saw a shift on the war from the excellent point that Dan made about how 2004 Bush versus Kerry was all about why we went to war, who voted for the war, and then there was a shift to accountability of the war, conduct of the war, and that was a better equation for Democrats in general, and the fact that it was a steady drumbeat coupled with all these other points that people have made started to really turn the tide. And that's what I really saw inside these Senate and House campaigns all over the country.
And don't forget about candidate fatigue. About the 6th year, you always have fatigue. I don't care who it is. It's, had it been John Kennedy, had he lasted that long, there would have been fatigue with John Kennedy. So in governors, senators, whatever, at a certain period of time, fatigue sets in. Bush probably made an error. I don't remember who said this in his public relations campaign for Social Security, changing Social Security. He became too public. He became too familiar, and his face was too well known at that point.